I don't think it would be wrong to describe what we're doing as fear-mongering. Everybody looks down on fear-mongering. What's wrong with being a fear-monger? Come monger some fear, because there's such a thing as not having enough fear on a particular topic, right? When something's about to slaughter you and you're not afraid, well, you got to call up the fear-monger to deliver you a dose of fear, right? Because that's what you need. Welcome to Doom Debates. It's Thursday, June 13th, and this is a monologue episode. It's just me talking about stuff. Thanks for listening. So, some show updates. I posted the last episode of me talking to my friend Ori Nagel, saying what the show is going to be about, and I got some good reactions from you guys on my main social channel, which is YouTube and Twitter, or X. Those are my social channels. You guys are my brain trust over here on YouTube and Twitter, so whatever you guys are writing, I'm taking it to heart. And this is my lean startup approach. So you guys basically give me the tips, which I appreciate, and I just try to iterate fast. I don't try to make every episode perfect. I'm trying to just get a fast-paced feedback loop where I do a relatively small incremental amount of work. I get some feedback, I course correct, do another incremental amount of work, partly because that way I don't spend a lot of time in some part of the optimization that doesn't help much, partly because it keeps me motivated to not have to do a huge chunk of work before getting another round of feedback, and partly because I have to assume that I already have things 60% or 70% dialed in already, because it's not going to fundamentally change what I'm doing. So sure, a few things are going to get better over time, but if you're not liking episode 1 and there's not like a couple hundred people who like the first episodes, it's probably not going anywhere anyway. So that's why I want to start lean. I want to get that first feedback. So yeah, I will get a better mic and camera setup. I hear you guys loud and clear, and I will wear nicer clothes. A commenter pointed out there's this idea of the talent stack, I think originating with Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, which is like, hey, you can have different skills, you can be good at debating, you can be knowledgeable about AI, and I mentioned something like that in our last episode, but the guy on YouTube said, another part of the talent stack is dressing well and just looking professional, right, which includes the mic and video setup. So I'm going to get that part of the talent stack, and we're going to be the rare combination of good debates, clear overviews of AI Doom, and professional appearance. So expect that. There's going to be a Shure microphone on a boom. There's going to be a button-up shirt right here. Can we get some editing? Can we get some post-production? Make this look like a button-up? No, we can't. Okay. And also some big news, if you're looking forward to our next 144 episodes, I can now tell you that one of them is going to be Dr. Robin Hanson is coming on the show. He offered to debate me on Twitter, so he's great. He's actually one of my most influential intellectual influences. I've been reading his stuff also since 2007 because he used to co-blog with Eliezer. It was his blog. It was called Overcoming Bias. And then later Eliezer split off into his own blog, Eliezer Yudkowsky, lesswrong.com. You've probably heard of it. My first experience with Robin and Eliezer was, I don't know how I got there. Maybe I was reading Reddit. Maybe somebody linked me over to it. And I randomly read this article that's by Eliezer, and then I randomly click and read a different article, and I had the holy crap moment with Eliezer's articles. I'm like, who is this guy? Why is this writing so good? Why is this so lucid? How does this exist? And I never knew about it, because I was 20 at the time. That was my first exposure. So yeah, and and then Robin was there too, right? So Robin, for me, wrote in on Eliezer's coattails because I saw there were a bunch of posts by Robin. I saw there were a few posts by Hal Finney, who's probably the inventor of Bitcoin. So that was pretty cool, randomly reading Hal Finney in 2007. But that's another story, I guess. So anyway, I digress. Robin Hanson is going to be debating AI Doom. I'm a huge fan of Robin's work. You'll hear more when I do the episode with him. He's considered the godfather of prediction markets. Maybe he didn't invent the idea, but he certainly emphasized it and pointed out how much value was being left on the table by our society not doing prediction markets. You probably know one of his terms, the Great Filter. That's a Robin Hanson term from the late 90s, I think. Most of you listening to this probably don't realize that Robin Hanson has actually done a major accomplishment in 2021, and that was his Grabby Aliens paper. Also, you can check it out at grabbyaliens.com. Whatever prize people give for breakthroughs, I guess the Nobel Prize potentially, whatever prize you want to give him, I think Grabby Aliens is a triumph that solves the Fermi paradox, solves the Great Filter, partly. Actually, I'll talk to him about that. I don't know how much it solves the Great Filter, but it kind of solves the Fermi paradox. And there's never been anything like it. Like, there's never been an equally satisfying solution to the Fermi paradox, and yet it's gone mostly unnoticed. Like, yes, it's gotten millions of views on YouTube, but Like I said, most of you listening to this probably don't realize how much Robin Hanson solved the Fermi paradox in 2021. So go check that out, and hopefully I'll get a chance to ask Robin a few questions about grabby aliens when we talk. But again, not to digress too much, so I respect Robin Hanson as much as I respect anybody, but I gotta say, just like other people have mentioned, just like Steven Pinker, just like David Deutsch, when it comes to the issue of AI doom, he's giving a probability that to me seems insane. He's not in what I call the sane zone. The sane zone is like 5% to 95%. If your P doom is in the sane zone, I don't really have a beef with you. If I don't really mind if you say 5% and I say 50%, close enough. But if you're like Robin Hanson and you say, yeah, it's way less than 1%, I don't even think you're in the sane zone. So that's mind blowing to me. There's no question Robin has contributed much more to the intellectual progress of humanity than I ever will, right? If you just compare us one by one, okay, Robin wins, right? And yet, on this particular topic, he just seems ridiculously wrong. So I don't know what to make of that, but we're going to get down into the details when we debate. And of course, you can just go on YouTube and you can just type in Robin Hanson and you can see other debates that he did last year on AI Doom. If you want the closest one to how I expect that mine is going to go, then go check out Robin Hanson with Ronnie Fernandez. Ronnie's views are very similar to mine, and I think he put up the best debate among the debates that Robin did last year. I think it's like 2 hours long. So I recommend checking that out, or just stay tuned for my debate. If you just want that, it'll probably be a little shorter if you want to save time. Okay, so that's Robin Hanson. Now let's talk about the plan for how I want to make a difference. What am I doing here? Why am I rabble-rousing on this podcast? So this is my mechanism of action, the causal linkage between what I'm doing, sitting here talking to you, and not dying, right? How is that causally connected? Well, it's basically raising awareness and moving the Overton window. So, the Overton window is basically the set of topics that's considered appropriate to even bring up, right? Like in politics, everybody knows that abortion is this highly political subject, right? If you're talking about abortion, you're talking about politics, they're two peas in a pod. But if I want to talk about how it would be great to let people sell kidneys, that's not really in the Overton window, right? Even though I would argue that a movement to let people sell kidneys on the open market the same way they do in Iran and pretty much no other country, I feel like that would be a huge value add, right? That would save a lot of people's lives and it would also get a couple people paid. But that's not really in the Overton window, right? If you saw a big protest for kidneys, kidney markets and organ markets, it'd be like, well, what the hell is going on? Why are we even talking about this? And you could be like, well, it's gruesome, but abortion is gruesome too, right? But it's just abortion is just a Overton window sanctioned topic. So with AI Doom, I want to just drag it into the Overton window, right? So I just want to have the average person think, oh, you want to make policy? You're in government? Okay, what's your position on AI Doom? Right? Because these days it's actually slowly creeping there as AI is just getting prominent and companies are using AI and people are worried about, deep fakes and stuff like that. So it's creeping into the Overton window, but we need to hurry up and make it an Overton window topic of like, hey, AGI, not AI, but AGI. What do you think about the fact that AGI is going to kill us? What's your policy position on that? Do you want to pause AI or no? And here's the beauty of the strategy. Normally, when you want to raise awareness for something, people might still disagree with you. They're like, okay, you want me to think about it? I'm thinking about it, but I disagree. Now, on the subject of AI doom, I actually think that most people, when you bring up the subject to them, when you make them think about it, they're actually on our side. They're on the pause AI side. Like the average person, the average person isn't really a techno-optimist, which is a shame. But on this particular issue, to be pessimistic about how AGI is going to evolve, their natural techno-pessimism happens to just get them to the right conclusion, right? So I'm not saying that these people are good thinkers who will reliably get to the right conclusion. I'm just saying that on the topic of AI risk, you give them 5 minutes to think about it, and they come back and they're like, I don't like it, right? I'm willing to pause. I'm like, great, pause. Okay, cool, let's do it. Vote for pause. So if there was just a ballot initiative saying like, let's pause super intelligent AI, they'd probably say, yeah, sounds good, right? But they just have to have the issue top of mind. It just has to be an issue they talk about because most people, when I have that conversation with them, when pollsters have that conversation with them, there are polls showing, yes, we don't like AI, we're scared of it. But they think of it as something that'll happen in like decades or even longer. It's just like, yeah, this is coming, but I have other stuff to focus on today. So a lot of my goal is just to get it out there in the mainstream as like, nope, this is urgent. This is the issue. This is the number one thing we need to be debating. Even though World War III is kind of starting in various places in the world, this is even more important than that. This is the number one issue. So I want to raise awareness in that sense because, again, just raising awareness, I think, will cause the right policy. Just forcing people to take a stand, I think they're more likely to take the stand of like, oh wow, this is scary, like let's pause it, compared to, oh, you want me to take a stand? I'm an accelerationist, tech is good. I think some people will take that stand. I think more people will take the pause AI stand. So that's kind of my goal with this podcast, is to raise the temperature and just make everybody realize how doomed we are, how out of our element we are to try to continue forward on this particular line of progress, and step back and be like, okay, this is just completely uncalibrated. Like, we're about to open Pandora's box, and there's no closing that box. Like, we're about to press the game over button, right? I'm just trying to get that argument, not even to make everybody agree with that claim, but to build the mutual knowledge of like, hey, this is a claim that a lot of people are making, and it's urgent, right? This is top of mind. So how can you help? You can do whatever you can to raise awareness, and then go to pauseai.info, right? So I'm a member of the Pause AI communications effort, where we're just doing protests. I was out in front of OpenAI's office yelling into a bullhorn a few weeks ago.
Pause AI! We don't want to die! Pause AI! Pause AI! Pause AI! Pause AI!
In the Mission District at OpenAI headquarters, dozens of demonstrators demanding to pause AI.
We're not anti-technology. We love that GPT can be useful. So we're sounding the alarm that we need to hit the pause button. It's too soon for us to be able to handle superhuman intelligence because we need more research into how to make it safe. If you want to help, a really good starting point is to go to pauseai.info and join the Discord, and you'll see a bunch of projects that people are working on, and you can just help out with one of those projects. And also, you can talk to your friends and family. You can post on social media. It is one of those rare occasions where that vague, hand-wavy term, raise awareness, I actually think raising awareness will help. And it's kind of funny. I don't think that it would be wrong to describe what we're doing as fear-mongering. Everybody looks down on fear-mongering. What's wrong with being a fear-monger? Come monger some fear, because there's such a thing as not having enough fear on a particular topic, right? When something's about to slaughter you and you're not afraid, well, you got to call up the fearmonger to deliver you a dose of fear, right? Because that's what you need. One more thing, I'm looking for people to debate me. I already have a list. A few have stepped up. I've got people that I've always wanted to, like Robin Hansen. But if you feel like, hey, I've got a position that Liron hasn't covered, then just hit me up. Just go to Liron, Liron, that's my username, and direct message me or tweet at me, or email me at wiseguy@gmail.com and just give me a short blurb about what your position is. I'm interested in a variety of different positions because there's no one right position to argue against me, right? There's like a million different positions. It's what I call stops on the doom train, right? The doom train is all the different things you need to believe. You got to go to this stop, go to the next stop, go to the next stop. It's all the different logical inferences that you have to accept in order to then get to the conclusion of like, wow, we're very doomed, and it's very unlikely that we're going to avoid doom. There's a bunch of different places you can get off the doom train. So the reason I'm interested to argue with so many different people is because there's so many different stops where people get off. Like, people are very creative with the stops that they get off. I was even just chatting with somebody who you'll hear in the next couple of weeks, who he wants to get off at the idea of like, should we even value future people's lives? And should we maybe only value present people's lives? I disagree with that stance, but it's just one place that you can get off on the doom train that you might not even have thought of. And so that's what this podcast is about. We're just going to catalog all the different stops on the doom train, and we're going to round up everybody who got off at that stop, and we're going to say, get back on the doom train. This goes straight to doom, and you're not allowed to get off at that stop. That's actually, you just invented a stop because you're not ready to face doom, and get back on the train. Okay, so those are the show updates I wanted to talk about, and then let's get to some object level topics here. My focus for today is this tweet that I did, this viral tweet, and the reason I call it a viral tweet is because Eliezer Yudkowsky retweeted it, and it showed up on the roundup that Zvi Moshowitz does every week, which I highly recommend. Okay, this is my tweet, and remember, ASI stands for Artificial Superintelligence. Will humanity be able to determine which ASI behavior is safe and desirable by having it output explanations and arguments that we can judge? Some argue yes, some argue no. It's tough to judge. So you see why the answer is obviously no. All right, unpacking that. I want to unpack the idea that you can't just rely on a competing set of super intelligent AIs to have a debate, and then we as humans can judge the debate, and only the AI that's giving a good argument is going to convince us humans. So we're fine because we're such good judges of debates that we're just going to go with the most convincing AI, and it doesn't matter that other AIs are trying to argue for like crazy stuff, because we'll always just land on the correct arguments because debate is the key to truth, right? That's kind of the other side's position that's arguing for these kind of debate strategies. And like, that's great. I hope that that strategy works, but I'm just very, very pessimistic. So let me walk you through why I'm pessimistic. But first, I guess to also honor the other side's argument, they bring up P versus NP. They bring up this theorem in computational complexity theory, or this, not exactly a theorem, but a very strong conjecture that verifying a proof is easier than searching out the proof, right? So like if I wanted to prove to you that there's infinitely many prime numbers, it takes me a lot of creativity to find the argument of how I know that there's infinitely many prime numbers or why the square root of 2 is irrational. It takes a lot of cleverness to prove that. But once I write down the proof, you can have a high school student just read what I wrote down, and once they finish reading it, they'll be absolutely convinced that, like, yes, indeed, there are infinitely many prime numbers. I'm going to stop looking for the greatest prime number because I know there's infinitely many. Or I'm going to stop looking for two integers that I can divide to get the square root of 2. I'm giving up on that because that proof is absolutely convincing. So that's a good example of how a super intelligent prover, or just somebody who's more intelligent than a high school student, let's say, right, can find the proof, and the high school student can verify it, and everybody's happy, and we all agree about these theorems. So why doesn't that same argument then hold for super intelligent AI? We're just humans. We can't search out all these great arguments. We can't search out the argument of, like, why the AI should be allowed to modify some protein and build the next race of humans, but maybe the AI has a really good argument why modifying it like that is totally going to work. Right, so maybe that's starting to sound scary, right? If you try to visualize the scenario of the AI pointing to like a new piece of code or a new piece of DNA and being like, look, I have a proof for you why this is good, maybe you can start to get a little nervous about that scenario. And that points to the first issue, which is the proof, what the proof is saying can just be like very, very complex. So yes, if you look at it from a computational complexity perspective, maybe it's polynomial time, which is what the theorem says about verifying proofs. Like, yeah, you can verify it quickly in a sense, but quickly could also mean wading through thousands of lines of code that's about code, right? Like sub-theorems and lemmas that are saying like, yeah, I'm telling you, I have a really good argument why this is going to work because look at this giant mass of proof that I generated you. And it's only 1,000 lines, so you just have to take out a microscope and just go line by line for 1,000 lines. Will you get intuition at the end about what you just read? Probably not, right? Like the proof of the four-color theorem, you don't have to look up what that is, but famously that proof was just like, okay, well, a computer just checked every case, and here's like a 1,000-page printout of how the computer has proved it. And you look over the printout, and it's like, okay, I guess the computer checked every case, and if I check every case, that's not going to give me intuition for why the four-color theorem is true. It just looks like the computer found a reason it's true. Great, right? So don't imagine that just because we have P versus NP telling us that proving is easier than verifying, that's not going to give us a bunch of intuition about why the AI is claiming that things are true, even if it has a proof. Okay, so that's one argument that I wanted to stick into your intuition. There's another argument, which is we suck at judging simple truths. And a go-to example that I use, be prepared for a controversial example because it's in the nature of these kind of examples to be controversial, but the idea of blockchain technology and Web3 being a logically incoherent pitch. I spent a lot of 2022 when Andreessen Horowitz was fundraising and they had $7 billion investing into what they called Web3. They were making pitches like, hey, blockchain technology is going to power a new web. We call it Web3. Chris Dixon even has a book about it. It's called Read, Write, Own. It just came out in January 2024. Even though the crypto hype has died down, Andreessen Horowitz still has like $2 billion that they need to invest. So Chris Dixon has a book called Read, Write, Own. And that book has a lot of smart people reading it and being like, wow, this is an insightful book. So even this year, right, this is still going on where people are like, Web3 is such an exciting idea. Chris Dixon is making so much sense. But in my mind, that book is just a perfect example of arguments that are fooling people, but they're actually weak arguments. So if you think I'm right, it's pretty easy because now you're saying, wow, here's smart people convincing other smart people of something that the argument itself is flawed, and they think that the argument is good. If you think that I'm wrong, if you think Web3 is going to be amazing and everybody's going to start using Web3, that's fine. You can still follow along what I'm saying. You can say, people like Liran, who really should know better, really should be able to tell a good argument, and Liran thinks it's a bad argument, right? So even if you flip it around and you're a crypto proponent, you should be alarmed that crypto skeptics like me aren't able to see such a great argument by such a great mind as Chris Dixon's. So any way you spin it, it's clear that the smart humans of the world aren't able to converge on simple arguments for relatively simple truths, like whether or not Web3 has a use case, whether or not there's going to be some social network or some neobank, some kind of new exchange that everybody uses that's going to be powered by Web3. It's a pretty simple hypothesis that you can have a relatively simple argument about compared to the kind of stuff that super intelligent AI is going to be telling us about how to reshape our world, right? It's going to be saying, hey, let me just create a human with a brain that looks like this, or like, hey, you should really attack this particular target, right? You should assassinate this leader on the world stage, Mr. President. I'm telling you that that's going to have great repercussions for the following reason. And the president's like, are you sure you're not missing anything? Right? Like the kind of arguments are going to be more complex. The kind of claims are going to be more complex than the claim about saying, blockchain technology doesn't have any use case except double spend prevention of cryptocurrency because it is in fact a double spend prevention ledger. That's the whole reason it was invented, was to prevent double spending, right? So that's like a much simpler argument. I'm not saying it's a trivial argument, but it's a much simpler argument than the kinds of arguments that AIs are going to be making to tell humanity how to run the world and to tell humanity to give it more power and to tell humanity to run giant scripts and just let the scripts do what they're going to do. Right? You're not going to have this intuition of like, I get why this script is good. Not even close. And if we're dealing with controversial issues, one that comes to mind for me as an Israeli is the whole Israel-Palestine quote-unquote genocide, right? So the only reason I bring this up, I'm obviously on the Israeli side as an Israeli who feels attacked and feels like Israel's security is at risk. That's just my side. You're welcome to disagree. But my point here is that you have smart people on both sides. That's my only point. It would be completely wrong for me to say everybody who disagrees with me on Israel-Palestine is dumb or they're a bad person, right? They have bad values. I would argue that might be true about some people on the other side, right? I mean, it's associated with my position to think that maybe on average, people on the other side have worse morality or they're dumber. But I would never argue that about everybody, right? I can think of like 5 people who I totally respect as thinkers on the other side. I guess Paul Graham, I'll name one, right? He blocked me on Twitter, not because I replied to one of his tweets, but because I made my own tweet randomly saying something pro-Israel. Paul Graham blocked me. I totally respect Paul Graham, right? I did Y Combinator 2017, for God's sakes. I wish I could read his public tweets without having to log out. But that's an example of like, look, Paul Graham and Israeli VCs can't get on the same page on the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? So regardless of who is more right, you've got an instance of the absolute smartest thinkers who just are not convinced by the same series of arguments, even though they're trying. Okay, so I think we're starting to get the ball rolling here on the case of like, yeah, we as humans, we as groups of smart humans, just aren't that good at converging using arguments, converging on the same correct belief. One more example for you is what I tweeted about, which is the irony of this very debate, right? This whole debate about whether we'll have super intelligent AIs that can robustly convince us of correct conclusions and not robustly convince us of incorrect conclusions. The whole debate that I'm jumping into right now, the fact that the debate exists is ironically proof that the answer is no, that we're not going to be able to have AIs that only robustly convince us of good conclusions. And not only the debate about this fine point, but also the larger debate about P-doom, right? So the fact that you have really smart people like Jan LeCun, like Robin Hanson, like Steven Pinker, like David Deutsch, who just have really low P-dooms, like sub 1%, I believe. I don't think Steven Pinker and David Deutsch have said it explicitly, but let's say Robin Hanson and Jan LeCun have explicitly said much less than 1%, which I call the insane zone. So the fact that smart people can't even agree on whether the P-doom is much less than 1%, or whether it's greater than 5%, potentially even greater than 50%, the fact that we have that monster of a gap, orders of magnitude gap among smart people, is again proof that smart people don't use arguments to converge toward correct beliefs. Now, okay, proof is too strong a word, right? I really should have just said like strong evidence, because of course it's not a proof. Like I might be wrong. There could be the holy grail, which is it's possible in theory that you might have a superhuman ability to make a convincing case for a good claim, but somehow have no superhuman ability for a bad claim because maybe the bad claims, there's just something fundamental to the logic of bad claims that you just can't have a superhuman convincing argument for the bad claims. So what I mean is like, you could imagine that with the right argument, with a superhuman arguer, assuming that a pro-Israel stance is correct, you can imagine a superhuman AI could successfully convince Paul Graham that, like, no, it's not a genocide and, like, Israel is defending itself, whereas that same superhuman AI, try as it might, just can never convince the pro-Israel camp that Israel is committing genocide because something in the fundamental logic of the situation is like that, right? And again, sorry to use a charged example, right? But you can imagine that, like, maybe I'm wrong about blockchain technology, and the AI can successfully convince me that I'm wrong, and the superhuman AI just cannot convince Chris Dixon that he's wrong because he is in fact right. That is theoretically possible, right? I'm just trying to argue that it's unlikely, but I want to address the question of like, why exactly doesn't P versus NP make that situation plausible? It has to do with knowing how to put things into context and knowing which subclaims to argue for. I think those are the elements that are just not captured by people pointing to P versus NP and pointing to the idea of proof versus verification. When you point to those things, you're neglecting the idea of knowing how to put things into context and knowing which claims to argue for. For instance, let's say that you try to argue to me as strongly as you can that air conditioners are impossible. Let's say the year is 1500 and it's a hot day, it's hot outside, it's hot inside, and I'm like, man, I wish somebody would invent a device that's not just a fan which blows air over me, but it's something that fundamentally lowers the temperature of the room. And then somebody else says, no, Leon, I can give you a very strong argument that that's impossible because all you can do, with whatever device you build, all you're going to be doing is moving the air around. And motion actually generates heat. Let me prove to you thermodynamically that motion generates heat. So you could make an argument that to me sounds very convincing, and I wouldn't really, let's say it just never occurs to me of the idea of like, well, what if we can somehow extract some of the heat from the particles on the inside of the room and move them to the outside? Is that a possible thing? And even if that did occur to me, I'd be like, no, that seems impossible. How could you possibly only take the fast-moving particles and move them outside and then leave slow-moving particles in the room? That doesn't seem like it's physically possible. So it'd be pretty easy to convince me in the year 1500 that air conditioning is just fundamentally impossible. Like the laws of physics disallow air conditioning. Now, hopefully, there would be some other prover being like, look, let me show you a way that air conditioning is possible. So I guess in that particular example, if you had another super intelligent AI that was motivated to tell me the truth, then I think that the truth probably would be stronger, right? I could probably theoretically be convinced that an air conditioner can be built. So I guess this example just illustrates a scenario where there could be a really good arguer if they're unopposed, right, convincing you of all kinds of crazy things like air conditioning is impossible. Another example I thought of is maybe I can prove to a two-dimensional creature that you can't hold up your left hand and have the thumb be on the left. I could be like, look, hold up your left hand. The thumb is pointing inwards. The thumb is on the right side. There's no way you could ever hold up your left hand and have the thumb point to the left side. Now, of course, as three-dimensional creatures, we can imagine being like, look, you can flip your hand and then you'll have your thumb point to the left side. And the two-dimensional creature just can't fathom that, right? It doesn't realize that there's this larger context that you can have more dimensions, and it's a contingent fact on their two-dimensional experience where your thumb can go. So that's the kind of thing where like AI can present something to us, which is an airtight proof, but it's an airtight proof within 2 dimensions or within 3 dimensions or within Euclidean geometry, right? Like angles of a triangle, they have to add up to 180. They absolutely have to. And it's like, well, it actually makes perfect coherent sense to just say that they can add up to more and you just have a different type of geometry. And maybe that type of geometry maps better to physics, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is like, there's times in people's lives where it just feels like they have an airtight argument and they're like, this is done. I've got the proof. It's done. This is as strongly as I can ever possibly believe something. But then somebody digs a trapdoor, right? The trapdoor opens. There's a third dimension. There's non-Euclidean geometry. Let me share a personal experience where somebody opened the trapdoor on me. And that has to do with Newcomb's problem and causal decision theory. So Newcomb's problem is this idea that there's 2 boxes placed in front of you by an alien superintelligence called Omega. And Omega is all about predicting what people will do. It's a super intelligent predictor. It scanned my brain going into this challenge, and that was like yesterday night. So yesterday night, while I was sleeping, Omega scanned my brain. Omega predicted what I would do when faced with these 2 boxes, and Omega set up the challenge accordingly. The 2 boxes, box A, is a special box that either is empty or has $1 million in it. And then box B always has $1,000 in it. And my choice is I can either take only box A or I can take both boxes. So it sounds like a really obvious choice, like, okay, just take both boxes because then you get box A and box B. But Omega is very adversarial. Omega is really being a dick here. And Omega says, aha, if it predicted last night that I am the kind of person who, in this situation, is going to take both boxes, then it didn't put any money in box A. So Omega really wants to reward the kind of people who are only going to take box A. So that's the crazy setup of Newcomb's problem. Now, when I first heard of Newcomb's problem, I was like, okay, well, I see why this is like a challenge because I would hate for box A to be empty. But that said, Omega's gone. I'm just standing here. There's box A and box B. Okay, either box A has the money in it or it doesn't, but I'm taking both boxes and I'm going to run. And of course, what happens next in the story is I take both boxes and I open box A and it doesn't have any money in it. Because the premise that Omega was able to scan my brain last night and know that this is all going to happen, that's a totally reasonable premise, right? And if that premise sounds crazy to you, that a brain scan could reveal such a thing, imagine that the brain scan reveals such a thing with 90% accuracy or even 60% accuracy. It still makes the thought experiment work. It still makes the dilemma be a fiendish dilemma. It doesn't solve the puzzle. It'll be like scanning is impossible with 100% accuracy. So anyway, I don't have time to get into Newcomb's problem too much, but the takeaway here is that I eventually got convinced that my choice to take both boxes is actually not the best choice. And I am now the kind of person I was reluctantly, I have changed my mind. And if you put those two boxes in front of me, I am now going to only take box A. And I'm going to walk away and I'm going to open box A and it's going to have $1 million in it, most likely. And then I'll do better than the guy who took both boxes. But it was very reluctant for me to be dragged to this choice because there's obviously the argument of like, look, Omega's gone. The boxes are already there, right? And there's this thing called causal decision theory, which is the standard way that you're taught to make decisions, I guess, in college economics, which is like you just model causally forward from your current position. Omega's gone. I'm standing here. There's two boxes in front of me. However much money I get by taking box A, I can get that plus 1,000 if I take both boxes. So how stupid would I have to be to not take box B? Right? I can't change the past. I'm sorry that I'm about to take both boxes, but the past is the past. Omega already scanned it. So anyway, so you can go back and forth with Newcomb's problem. You might not be convinced. I encourage you to read other resources on Newcomb's problem, but my point is this. The first time I heard the problem, I was convinced you have to take both boxes because of simple causal decision theory. Omega's gone. Why would you leave? Why would you walk away and leave box B sitting there? That's crazy. It has $1,000 in it, right? So that was my original reaction, and I probably would have defended that pretty hard, right? I probably would. I might have even said, you know what? I'm willing to die on this hill, right? You could literally kill me because I'm so confident in the logic. Now, of course, as a more mature person, I just know I've now internalized the pattern that like, oh, I'm often just freaking wrong, right? Like I'm capable of being very wrong. So I wouldn't do that. But maybe, when I first heard the problem, I was only 20 years old, and maybe I would have been more arrogant. And I'm like, listen, I know logic, okay? Logic tells me that I better take both boxes. And then I got B slapped, right? I learned my lesson of like, oh, there's actually really strong arguments why causal decision theory can actually screw you. Even though I'm like, damn, causal decision theory? That seems like that's like so close to the heart of logic. So the takeaway here is that you can have something which you just think you think is a very foundational belief, you think is the most solid thing that you can grasp onto. And maybe one of those things is your ability to adjudicate debates. Maybe you feel really, really confident that you can judge arguments. And then you can get B slapped. You can find yourself totally like, oh crap, I judged that debate wrong, and now the universe has been bricked, right? Or in the case of Newcomb's problem, okay, I judged it wrong, I lost $1 million. So I'm just saying, imagine having that feeling, and now imagine trying to tell me that, oh yeah, AIs are going to argue with each other, and we're going to be able to know which AI is arguing better. Okay, I think that's all I want to say on the topic. Hopefully you agree that it is at best extremely risky to think that we as humans can help choose which AI to listen to based on listening to them debate. All right, and I will see you soon in the next episode of Doom Debates.